This is episode 266, all about the plein air movement in China and my big almost 4-week trip in China. And I'm going to be interviewed by Paul Fredrickson, who also happens to be an incredible marketing expert. So we're going to talk marketing for artists at the end. Let's do this.
This is the Plein Air Podcast with Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine. In the Plein Air Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called plein air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plein air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhoads.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the Plein Air Podcast. It's really nice to be back. I've been away way too much. It has, ever since COVID was over, the increase in travel and obligations and meetings and everything else is just really amplified. And I am not getting this done as much as I want to. And my apologies for that. I'm trying to get that changed. So we'll be back more frequently. I've been painting. As a matter of fact, at the moment I'm recording this I'm in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. And I have decided that I want to get a big painting into the local museum here, and it needed to be something that was really representative of life here in the Adirondacks. There's a place where everybody goes and they jump off the rocks into the water. It's a giant waterfall. It's called the Flume, and I've painted it, taken people to paint there hundreds of times, maybe dozens of times, probably more likely. And it's a place where some of the great masters of the Hudson River School of Painters painted. And so I decided to do this like 3.5 foot, almost 4 foot tall painting of the waterfall. And so I did it actually in the studio. I kind of blocked it in the studio with some studies I had and some photographs. And then I thought, it really just looks awful. So I drug my big studio easel down because I don't have an easel big enough for outdoors. I need to get one. But drug the studio easel down in this giant painting. I needed to wait till it dried. I don't know why. And I'm walking down the hills with my backpack and this giant painting and easel. And, it's really steep getting down there. And I set up down there. And my intention was just to work on it for a couple hours. I probably was there for 3 or 4 hours. And I completely repainted it because I didn't like it. And because, I just had some things that were way off. And of course, the light's going to change a lot. And I kind of preserved the light that I had. But it just makes such a difference to do it in person. The stuff that I was seeing, even from my studies, was not as accurate as what I was seeing in person. And just makes a huge difference. So that's why I plein air paint. And that's why I love doing it. It's a lot of fun. It's adventurous. And I hope that you are doing it too. And you're getting out there. Well, today is going to be an interesting day because today is going to talk about where I've been, right? So I decided to take a trip to China. I was invited. You're going to learn all about that story. And I was supposed to go before COVID. That didn't happen, obviously. So anyway, we're going to talk about what I discovered in China about plein air painting, which is remarkable and was a big, giant surprise to me. Much bigger surprise than I anticipated, and you're going to learn all about that. I asked a buddy of mine who's a painter to interview me because I didn't want to just sit and talk about it, and his name is Paul Fredrickson. Paul is he's a painter, but he makes his living in the advertising business. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we also do some art marketing at the end, because I always do art marketing at the end anyway. And so that's what we're going to do today. If you've got any ideas, feedback, marketing questions, people you would like to see as guests, drop me a note, Plein Air Magazine. Now, if you're new to plein air painting and you're looking for ideas to get better, we do have a free ebook for everybody, and it's really good. Um, it's I'm just going to say because I wrote it, but that would be arrogant. It's called 201 Essential Plein Air Tips, and you can get it at pleinairmagazine.com/ebook. And I should also mention, by the way, if you are not a subscriber to Plein Air Magazine, you're missing out on a lot. It's a bi-monthly. It's the #1 selling art magazine in America at the newsstands. I don't know how that ever happened, but I'm happy that it did happen. And everybody who paints kind of has a subscription. So we would love that for you. We're going to get right to our interview with yours truly from Paul Fredrickson. And then after that, we're going to do some marketing. Let's get to it right now. Paul Fredrickson, welcome to the Plein Air Podcast.
Hey, good to be here, Eric.
I should explain what's going on. Paul and I met at one of our events. We'll talk about that in a minute. He's a painter, and he's also in the advertising and publicity area in his career. He's done some work for a lot of really big, important clients. And Paul was telling me when we were talking about the China trip, he said, you need to get the word out about this. And I thought, maybe I should do a podcast about it. So that's why we're here. And I asked Paul if he would conduct the interview because I didn't want to sit here and talk about myself. It would be awkward. And because Paul's a painter and because he's kind of curious about what's going on in China and the plein air scene, I thought that it would be cool to have him here. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much.
So I was trying to remember where we met originally. It seems like it may have been at Fall Color Week in the Adirondacks right at the end of COVID. Does that sound about right?
Could have been, or it may have gone all the way back to the expo that we had in Denver, where I first met you, and then we've talked off and on since then. So
your first experience with us was going to the plein air convention.
Yeah.
Well,
Loved it, by the way. So I think I've told you that, but it's a good experience, and it's a great entry point for anyone who wants to get into plein air, because you've designed it in such a way that it really introduces a lot of things to you in a week session, in a week-long session. So yeah, I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Were you at all intimidated as a first timer, thinking like, and I don't really know this about you and your comfort level, but I hear from some people, it's like, well, I don't think I deserve to go to something like that because I'm not a good painter and I don't want to paint in front of other people.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of apprehension about it because, you don't know who you're going to be surrounded by and if you're going to feel a little embarrassed and so forth. By that point, I had already picked painting back up for about 6 months or so. So I felt comfortable where I was because I've been in art all of my life, but abandoned it or put it aside when we started having kids. But yeah, I was a little apprehensive about it, sure. But that was quickly just gone.
You're a pretty good painter, by the way. I have a portrait that you did of me.
Right.
This is wonderful. And you really have an interesting, if I might say, without sounding offensive, kind of a graphic eye. Meaning, I can tell from looking at your paintings, and maybe it's because I know this, but you have a design background. You've been in advertising your whole life, and it feels like your paintings are really well designed, and they don't look like every other painting. They have their own unique character to them. So I thought that was cool.
Well, thanks, Eric. Layout has never really been a big issue for me, being a graphic design major. But yeah, I enjoy it thoroughly.
So I'll tell you what. I think we're gonna pivot on this a minute. What I want to do is I want to move into talking about China. And then I think because we always do some marketing at the end of the podcast anyway, the marketing minute, I think what I'd like to do is just to have a dialogue with you because
Sure.
when you came to Fall Color Week, which was your first time coming to that,
Right.
we met again, and that's quite frankly, the first time I remember talking to you. My apologies. And you had some really great observations about how I could make things better and how I could improve it. And then you and I subsequently have painted together many times, traveled together, and as a result, we've had a lot of dialogue about artists and how artists need to promote themselves and what they should be thinking about and doing. And because you have an ad agency, now you're not, I don't think you're doing advertising for artists. I think that'd be too small.
Right.
But I know you've done some really major clients, big brands. I'm not at liberty to say who they are. You're welcome to if you wish.
Okay.
But I think that we'll just pivot at the end of this and talk just for a minute about artists and advertising. We'll make that be part of the art marketing minute.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds real good.
You're on the spot. What choice do you have?
Yeah, exactly. What am I going to say? No. Yeah, no, that's great. I love it.
Well, I'm going to turn this over to you because it's always a little weird talking about yourself.
Sure.
And but you pointed out to me, actually, before I went to China, that there were some things that you saw when you heard me talk about that trip that you saw as big opportunities. So
Right.
let's just go ahead and I'll let you interview me, and we'll just see where it goes.
Sure. Well, absolutely. Well, the first question that I have, and I think is probably on everyone's mind, is why China? Why did you pick China for a trip like this? And let's just go from there.
I have a lot of answers to that question, and I'll try to put them in sequence. The first thing is I love to put myself out of my comfort zone. I love to travel to places that seem exotic or seem difficult or seem challenging. And no, China was not on my radar. I wanted to say that up front. I always wanted to go to China. My dad went to China back when Nixon was in office, and he went with, I don't know if he went with YPO or something, but he was the very first group of Americans to ever go into China as a group. And I think it was the YPO thing. And so back then, you're like a movie star. They've never seen a Caucasian, and people are coming up and wanting to touch you and so on. So I heard a lot of stories about that. So I was always really curious about this. But what happened is I heard from a guy, and he called me about a year before COVID. And he said, I really enjoy the magazines. I really love Plein Air. He said, are you aware of what's happening in China with Plein Air? And I said, no, I'm not. He said, well, we have some events where literally thousands of people show up at these events to watch the painters. And he went on and on and on and on about this. And I was fascinated from that point. And then he said, would you like to go with me at some point? And I said, yeah, I'm in. I would like to go with you. So we had planned a trip for, get this, March of 2020. And so it's early March, or maybe it's April of 2020, and I'm in Russia. I went to Russia to film a couple of art instruction video series with the great Russian impressionist Nikolai Blokhin. And all of a sudden while we're over there, we started hearing about this COVID thing and that they're about to do lockdowns. And I was literally on the last flight out of Russia before they closed it all down. And so I get back to America, and now my wife's freaking out. She said, you're going to China in like a week or 2 weeks. And we're starting to hear about this, and they're starting to talk about shutting things down. And so I called this guy and I said, are you concerned at all about this? Yeah, no, that's no problem. And I said, well, you sure? He says, no problem. So I thought, okay, well, I'm game. I'll go. And we weren't quite at that point yet. And then all of a sudden, we're getting shut down, and so it was clear we weren't going to be able to go. So that trip got canceled.
Yep.
So I always wanted to go, and so it took some time, but I heard from him roughly 4 years later, something like that, and he said, "Listen, let's do this trip," and he said, "I want you to come for a month and a half." And I said, "I can't do that. My schedule wouldn't allow it." He says, "Well, the problem is that I want you to see 3 different major plein air events. And the problem is that they're not all together. You would have to wait until the next event occurred." And I said, "I can't do that." So he said, "I'll call you back." So he calls me back. He says, "I moved the events, and I moved them so that they're all right next to each other, so that you can travel across China and go to all of these events and experience all of these events together." So I'm like blown away. Why would he do that for me? And so that's kind of how it all came about.
That's amazing. What a story. The one thing I was wondering is, and you may have told me this before, but if you could share it with everyone, what is your goal? What was your goal for going to China? Did you have one or several goals that you wanted to achieve?
I'd like to tell you I'm that organized and that well thought out, but I can't say that I really had a firm goal. What I wanted to do was, after hearing about what was happening with plein air over there, I wanted to find out for myself. I wanted to see what it was like, what's going on. And we'll talk about that later, because I saw some things that were real eye openers for me. But that was mostly the goal, is to kind of figure that out, and then do a story for Plein Air magazine about it.
Right.
But
Right.
I also just, quite frankly, thought, well, it'd be cool to go to China.
Right.
And so that was part of it. And then the more I started thinking about it, I thought, this is a huge opportunity. He described to me what was going to happen. And he said, "I want you to speak at some colleges. I want you to speak at some events. I want you to prepare a couple of different presentations." And he asked me what I might prepare. And I said, "Well, what I'd like to talk about the plein air movement in the world. And then I'd also, I said, I can help people with marketing." I said, "I don't know if they have that problem in China, but every artist here wants to know about marketing." And he said, "Yeah, why don't you prepare both of those?" And so I thought, well, this will be kind of a good idea. And I remember talking to you about it before it happened, and you said, you used a word that I hadn't thought of, and that is, you're being an ambassador.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's right. It's like being a plein air ambassador, and going and kind of talking about the plein air world. And so that's kind of what happened.
Didn't you tell me at one time that China has, if you were to rank by country the number of plein air painters, and I think the U.S. is number one, but China is like right up there. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do. I don't have any hard data on this. A lot of this is just based on what I've experienced and what I've seen.
Uh-huh.
But first off, plein air is very alive and well in China. The number of plein air painters in China probably in reality outnumbers the number in the United States. Now, I went over there thinking that the United States was the biggest in terms of plein air, in terms of the number of people. And we have, through various techniques, we've estimated over the years the number of people that we think are painting in plein air, at least seriously. And we did that by going to a lot of the easel companies and trying to find out how many easels they had sold and so on. But we never included the mainstream stuff like the French easels and things that sell in much larger quantities.
Right.
So we have this estimation that there's probably at least 250,000 people seriously painting in America in plein air. And I think that maybe China, it's kind of a different type of plein air painter. So I want to get into that and talk a little bit about that. But I think that China probably eclipses it, and it's because of their education system.
Okay.
So in China, then this is something I discovered that was, I knew a little bit about some of their education system going
Right.
over. And what I knew was, I'm a bit of a Russophile. I've been to Russia several times. I've got great friends who are some of the top artists in Russia. And what essentially I discovered from them is that during the war, during the World War II, and kind of in that era, there was kind of a psychological warfare thing going on. This is all documented, that America was trying to show their sense of freedom. And so this is when we really saw the big push for modernism, the Jackson
Right.
Pollock and people like that. And there's a whole book on this, and it's very documented. You can Google this. And it turns out that that was actually a CIA operation to control the sense of, the sense of control in other countries. Stalin was encouraged to go modern, and he said, no, we're sticking with tradition. And he really pushed hard on traditional training, which had always gone on in Russia, but of course it had gone on everywhere close to that time. And he really, even though he was pushed to stick with modernism, he pushed instead to stick with realism. So what ended up happening is there was a thing called the Cultural Revolution in China, and that was the Russians were training the Chinese, and the Russians basically sent artists over to China, and they brought artists from China to Russia to study in their school systems, in their ateliers. And so especially the Repin Academy and the Sarakov Institute, and all part of the Russian academic system. And I was in Russia when I was in China. I met an elderly man who was older than me, which that's probably not possible, and he said, I was a part of that system. He said, the man who trained me was trained by the Russians, and I'm the second generation. Now I'm the old guy, but this is still going on. They still use the academic principles from Russia.
Wow.
And what is amazing is in Russia, the same thing is occurring in China, and that is that if you're part of the academic system and you're learning art in China, plein air painting is a requirement. And so that's why so many people are plein air painting, because there are 4 and 5 year students, and there are students who have to prepare to get accepted into the academies, and there's some really great academies, and so they follow traditional method of cast drawing and life drawing and some of the other things that had occurred in the older days and have kind of been lost by a lot of societies. But they required them to go out and paint from life in person in the lands. And in Russia, they have what they call the academic dasha, and all the students kind of go there in the summertime, and they have to spend 3 months painting outdoors during that time. Well, in China, they have a similar type of system, but they don't have a particular place that they send people.
Right.
They have what they call plein air bases. And I was fortunate enough to be taken to these plein air bases to meet with the owners and experience the bases. So my understanding, and I didn't go to all of them, but a plein air base is essentially a hotel. And it's a big hotel, a hotel so big that it can hold 1,000 people.
Okay.
And now 1,000 students of 4 or 6 to a room is not a lot of rooms, but the one that I visited last had about 200 regular, very nice, very high quality hotel rooms, very modern. and then they had another, I don't know, few hundred rooms that they had bunk beds in. They put 3, 4, 5, 6 people into a room. They had these massive dining halls to feed all these people. They had a massive gym to keep the kids working, and they had these big classrooms. So I went into a classroom, Paul, and there had to be 200 or 300 young people in this classroom. In this particular case, they were high school age students, and half of the classroom was facing one wall, half was facing another wall. And that classroom, they were teaching portraiture in one half of the room, and they were teaching still life in the other half of the room, and they were all copying the same portrait.
Right.
And so they were doing it in gouache, interestingly enough. And so, and I have a video on my my Facebook where I went in there and I got the kids excited and I talked to them. But I found out that what they were doing is the high school kids come to these plein air bases in summertime, and there are about 30 of these bases, and they are trained so that they can be ready to take the academic test to see if they're going to get accepted in the art schools. And I got to tell you that most of the students who were painting that day that I went in there, the level of quality of their paintings was matched a high level of quality that most of us who've been doing it for 20 years were doing.
Yeah.
So they already enter the schools at a high quality. Then when you go into, I know I'm rambling, I apologize.
No, this is great.
Then you go into the colleges, and there are, as you can imagine, there are hundreds of thousands of college students, probably millions of college students in China who are studying art, and they're all being required to go to these plein air bases and paint in plein air. So they go, the way the government set this up, from my understanding, I probably have a little bit of this wrong, but they go to places that are beautiful locations with scenic mountains, scenic landscapes. The one I went to was a small, what they call water village, which is basically, bridges and canals and very beautiful, but very antique, very ancient. And so they bring, they go to someone and they say, we will fund you to build a plein air base in this community. And we will, of course, let the colleges know that they can come there. And the colleges have to pay for the students to come there. And then they go out plein air painting all day. And then in the evenings, they do other things, portraits or whatever. And kind of like what we do at Fall Color Week.
Yeah.
And then there are literally millions of plein air painters for 4 or 5 years while they're in art college. So that's why there's so many more. Now, do those painters continue to do plein air the rest of their lives? I think that's up in the air.
Yeah.
I traveled with several Chinese artists, many of which were retired professors, retired from teaching, some of which were in their 50s, maybe near retirement. But I also traveled with probably a couple hundred young people who were wanting to follow us around and see us painting and watch what we were doing.
Wow. It sounds so different than what we are used to here in the U.S. I know when I went through a college for a fine arts degree, almost none of that. We were all taught, and I've spent a lifetime on learning this, that realism has been done. We've done that. We need to move on from that.
Right.
And almost to shaming you if you were to go out and paint plein air. And that's very sad, I think, now that I'm, older and wiser, I suppose. And it's amazing to me the cultural difference between China and the U.S. on that facet of the arts.
Well,
Yeah, go
there
ahead.
is there is modern art that is taking place in China. I don't want to
Yeah,
ignore that, and some of it is really very good,
right.
and some of it isn't, just like anywhere else. I
Sure.
think that the difference is, and I'm not exactly sure about this, but I think these correlate with Russia. Um, I went to the symphony with Nikolai Dubovik, who is a renowned professor at the the Serkov Institute in Moscow. He's a figure and portrait painting professor. He's very well known. And we went to the Bolshoi um, theater, and there were a lot of people there already. We went into a private box, and every head turned as we walked into the private box. And when they saw him enter, they erupted in applause and a standing ovation. Now, this is a guy, he's just a guy, he's a wonderful man, a good friend, but he, in the eyes of the Russians, is a hero. He's
Yeah.
an art teacher at the top art school in Moscow, which means he's at the best art school in the world as far as they're concerned. And they knew who he was, and they stood up and gave him a standing ovation when we walked into the room. And I think it's because in Russia, and I think the same thing has happened in China, probably because of Russia, and that is that every student at every level, at every grade, is being taught art and is being taught art appreciation. It has not been raped from the schools or ripped from the schools.
Right.
Now,
Right.
let me give you a really great example of this.
Okay.
So we're driving through the town. I don't remember what town it was. It's a pretty big city, actually. I say town. It was like 21 million people. And we pull into this courtyard, and we walk into this school. It's a middle school, and we walk in, and there is a reception for us. And by the way, there are receptions constantly in China. A lot of receptions, a lot of honoring, a lot of ceremony, which was really a lot of fun, for at least the first couple of times. And then, so we go there, and there are all these middle school kids in uniforms, and they are all there, and they have a big banner, and they're greeting us, and we come in, and they give us hugs and high fives and stuff. And then there's a young man who's, I wish I knew his name. He was probably one of the older students, and he spoke perfect English, and he was our translator. And he had a microphone on, and so everybody could hear him. And he said, "We wanted you to come to our school because we want you to see what we do here in China." And then he introduced me to the there they are. He introduced me to the principal and to one of the teachers. And the principal said, "We would like you to know that we have a 5,000-foot, or some, maybe he used meters, art gallery in our school, and the gallery contains classic historic paintings by great artists from the past, and we also include student work from over the years in the past." And they walked me through that gallery, and then they had lined all the halls of the entire school with artwork that was done by students. Now, if you went to a school in most of America, you would see a lot of really wonky stuff that looks like they were done by kindergartners, right?
Right.
Even when I went to see the art at my kids' school for an art exhibition, there was a lot of good stuff, but there was also a lot of stuff that wasn't. I didn't see it. Maybe they took it all out, but I didn't see anything that was substandard. These kids were already painting at a pretty decent level in middle school. And then, of course, and a lot of them are going to go on to mathematics or other careers and programmers, but they all the schools everywhere are training their kids in painting. Now, watercolor is a major force, much bigger force in China than it is in America.
Right.
And all of these kids were painting, most of these kids were painting in watercolor. I saw a few oils, I saw a few things in mixed media, and even some things on ceramics. As a matter of fact, in my studio, I have a beautiful ceramic painting that was given to me that I think one of the teachers had done. And so it was an eye opener, and I think that the reason that the Chinese culture is so enamored with traditional art is because they've all been taught about it. They've all been shown how to do it, required to do it, and the same thing was in Russia. So
Yeah.
the average Joe, the person who's working in a substandard job somewhere, still has a high appreciation for art.
Yeah. That's just amazing. Well, you've already walked us through some of the high points. Can you share some other high points of your trip?
Yeah, I mean, let me just talk about the beginning, right? So I told a bunch of people I was going to China, and almost every person said the same thing. Don't go there, it's dangerous. Don't go there, it's communist.
Yeah.
And by the way, I heard a lot of that when I was going to Russia. Probably in some cases it was more true in Russia. And then it was don't drink the water, don't eat the food, it's worse than Mexico. Yeah. And I'm freaking out. And one of my buddies who had been there on a painting trip said, take some extra shoes with you because there's going to be human excrement everywhere. And it's like, oh no.
Oh my gosh.
So I was expecting some really rough stuff, and I think that rough stuff exists, and I probably didn't see it. But I also think that a lot of things have changed. China is and I'm not trying to be pro-China. I'm just giving you my opinion on this.
Right.
I think that the people who have told me, they were there 20 years ago and they were there recently, and it's completely different. And I experienced that in Czechoslovakia. I went to Czechoslovakia when it was under communist rule, and then I went back a few years later, and it was like night and day. It was modern, it had changed. And so the thing that was amazing to me is how modern and progressive it was in the cities that I visited. I visited about 6 different cities.
Where were you? What cities were you?
Well, I flew into Beijing, and I flew out of Shanghai, and I went to a lot of different ones in between. Qingdao, I don't know, Chengdu.
You were basically in the northern part of the country.
No. We went as far south. We went close to the Vietnam border.
Oh,
we went to some pretty far south areas.
How did you travel? How did you travel through the country?
In one case we traveled by airplane. Another case or two we traveled by train, high-speed train, 200 miles. I think I was watching the MPH, and I think it went up to 195 miles per hour.
It's pretty amazing.
And it was a really great experience. And so I was not seeing people who were oppressed. I'm not saying they don't exist. I wasn't seeing it. People were well dressed. They were respectful. They were living in beautiful places. I saw the thing that I thought was really cool. They have these massive apartment buildings that I don't know how many units they have in them. But in America, you maybe in New York, you'd see a big apartment building and you see 2 or 3 of them side by side, especially in some of the older New York. I saw apartment buildings that probably had 500 or 700 apartments in them, and there were 30 or 40 of them in a row. Yeah. And there were, everywhere you went, there were 30 or 40 in a row. I swear there have to be 1 million or 2 million of them in China. And they were tearing down the old crummy apartment buildings and building new ones. Yeah. And so what I was seeing, I did see some stuff that was not, at the highest level. And I saw a couple of things that looked a little slummy, and, you could see things from the train and so on. And definitely in the countryside, people are living a different life, just like they're living a different life in the countryside here. Although maybe not as good, maybe better. I don't know. So I think that, the thing that blew me away was I was conditioned to expect this horrible society.
Right.
Now, the only time I experienced anything that was a little intimidating was I went to Tiananmen Square, and I had someone who took me there. And I took, by the way, I took two of my kids with me, and I took a videographer with me so I can build a documentary about this trip. And Tiananmen Square, I had to go through 3 levels of security, and I was going to take my paints in there, and everybody said, don't take them, they won't let them in. So I had my backpack, which had some stuff in it, and they took my Sharpies away, probably so I couldn't do graffiti, and they took my business cards away. I had a couple hundred business cards, and they took them away from me, and probably because they thought I would be handing out propaganda or something. But other than that, I didn't ever feel uncomfortable. And I talked with, or the people I was with were talking with police officers and things, and everybody was just really happy. I think that everybody seemed to be pretty happy with their lot in life. And I had a conversation with somebody about, what were the impacts of communism, and he said, it was horrible. It was absolutely terrible. We were all oppressed. We were starving. It was terrible. He said that all changed in 1977 when somebody different came into office. And he said since then, they've been really working towards being modern and being more progressive. And I said, well, what about the sweatshops I hear about? He said, well, those are typically run by Taiwanese. And I don't know if I believe that, but the other thing that I was blown away by was the architecture and the cars. So there are probably 20 or 30 car brands in China that I'd never heard of. And these were the most beautiful modern cars I've ever seen. They're more modern than our most modern cars. I was in a couple of limousine type cars, not limousines, but big vans. They were just 10 times more elegant than any I've been in America, and roomy and spacious and high ceilings. And, it was really nice. And I was in one car that the driver was on the left of me. I was in the front seat, and the entire front dashboard was a video screen. And, it was just really cool stuff. And I'm sure that will eventually come here. But I was reading in Auto Week recently that Americans are concerned at how rapidly China is eclipsing the car market.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty cool there. The other thing was the architecture, and that was, a lot of the older buildings have been torn down. As a matter of fact, one of the things that Mao did when he came into office is he tore down a lot of the old traditional stuff. So there's not as much of it as you would think there is. Thankfully, some's been preserved, but they put up modern buildings, and then, they get a building that gets to be, it was maybe built in the 1940s or 1950s. They're tearing them down and building new buildings. And so the architecture is spectacular. We were in Qingdao, I think it was, and we were looking at we were painting along the water, looking at the city, and it was a massive city, 21 million people. And all of a sudden, as the sun went down, the buildings all lit up, and the buildings were all one integrated video screen. So they were all playing video across one another. And I thought, how do you make that happen? There's 150 buildings, and they've got it all orchestrated. They're running the same feed. It's coordinated. It was very cool.
Wow. So I was over there about 25 years ago, my first time, around Hong Kong. And the air pollution was really bad. I mean, it was kind of one of those things where your eyes would burn. And did you have any issues with that kind of thing when you were over there?
Well, I was told I would, and it was really hot. Every place we went was really hot. It was like Texas hot. And there was a little bit of air pollution, but not a lot, not eye-burning air pollution. And I think I just hit it on a lucky time. But I will tell you that my calculation from just guesswork is that probably 20% of the cars were electric. And there's a lot of incentive for them to go electric, and they have special license plates that are green. So if you saw green license plates, you knew they were electric, and they were everywhere. So I think that they're really trying hard, at least in the big cities. I didn't like Beijing at all. And the reason I like Beijing is because it was just wall-to-wall traffic. It took 2 or 3 hours to go 20, what you could have walked in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so but it wasn't that way in the other cities I went to. Shanghai was really lovely.
Oh, it's
And
huge too.
yeah, and it's huge and amazing. Just the museum, we went to the museum in Shanghai. The museum, they happened to have a show of the Impressionists at the museum from France, which was good. But also there was, a well-known Chinese artist who had died young, and his work was there. It was phenomenal. It was a great experience.
So you mentioned earlier that you gave, I think, 3 presentations, right, to various groups. Can you tell us a little bit about those? What did you talk about?
Well, they were all different. So the first one was at a college in essentially in Beijing, and maybe a suburb of Beijing. And it was a pretty prominent college, but also a prominent art college.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind, this is June. And so I go into one of these rooms, and there's, a big one of these V-shaped rooms, like other colleges, lecture hall. And there are probably only 50, 60 students in there, and they're all looking at their phones, and they don't want to be there. It's like school's almost out. They don't want to be there. So I did a speech to that group, and a couple people paid attention, but most of them, they were like our kids here. They didn't want to be there. And so I spoke there about the plein air movement, what's been happening, I kind of went through the history. And one of the things I determined is I used to think that there's an artist by the name of Tassi. We have documented that he was the very first plein air painter. But once I got to China, I disproved that because there's a lot of evidence that and I don't remember the name, forgive me, but it's a lot of evidence that plein air painting took place 600 years before Western plein air painting ever took place. And a lot of that was through, ink drawings and calligraphy, but they were done on location.
Sure. Wow.
I also got to experience, there was a guy, we went to a resort, and it was in the mountains. We had to take a 2-mile car up cable car up to the top, and it had this beautiful mountain range. There was a guy up there who unrolled a scroll, and it was probably 30 feet long, and he's standing in front of the windows overlooking this view, and he painted that entire view. It took him all day to do it, but he did it in traditional calligraphy, with the Chinese brushes, which, by the way, I got to use some really good Chinese brushes, and they're wonderful.
Did you bring any back with you?
Yes, I did. Some of the professors gave me some, and I ended up, I wanted to go to an art store, and I went to one in Shanghai, and I was hoping to get what they had in China, in Japan, because in Japan we found an art store that was like 8 stories packed with all kinds of stuff.
Wow.
They did something interesting in China, which it happens a little bit in the United States, and that is they do proximity. So, in America, everybody puts all the car dealers together in one area. So if you're going to look at cars, you're going to go look at a whole bunch of them.
Right.
In China, all the art stores were next to each other. And there were like 5 or 6 art stores, and some were more traditional with oil paint, and others with watercolor. But then there were like 3 or 4 stores selling Chinese brushes and calligraphy materials, and a lot of other stuff. So I picked up some great stuff.
So has this experience inspired you to do more watercolor?
Well, it's interesting. So I was traveling on this trip with 2 Russian artists, 1 Moldavian artist, 1 American artist, and 1 Australian artist and his partner. And we were all traveling together for most of the trip. They went on to some other things that I couldn't go on to, and I did some things they hadn't done in the beginning. But so they were all watercolorists, and then we had about 4 to 6 really top Chinese artists with us, and they were all watercolorists. So we would go to these locations and we would paint, and all the students would come in and they would observe what we were doing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a big watercolorist. I'm learning watercolor. I've learned a lot on Watercolor Live. So I took my gouache painting. I wanted to take my oils because that's what I'm most comfortable with, but I didn't want to carry all the heavy paints and materials. So I took gouache, and I struggled with it. I've used it a lot, but I struggled with it in the beginning. Of course, like any trip, when you haven't painted for a while, you're going to struggle in the beginning. And I ended up doing one of the best paintings of my life, is so much so that when they were picking paintings from the other artists for this exhibit, they actually, and I wasn't part of that, they actually said, can we put this painting in the exhibit? And I said, sure, yes, absolutely. And then they said, we want to put this in the permanent collection of the museum.
Okay.
And it's a museum in a big city of 15, 20 million people. So and so I got to go to the museum opening, the exhibit. They had taken the painting and framed it up and put it out, and so it was really a lot of fun for me. What was your question? I kind of dodged it.
No. I was just wondering if you've gotten inspired to add more watercolor to your plein air work, and it sounds like gouache is maybe more of that transitional medium for you, right?
Well, I've been doing, since I got back from China, I've been doing mostly watercolors, and I've been painting with Chinese brushes, which what's interesting about the Chinese brushes is they're soft on the outside like watercolor brushes,
Right.
but they're hard on the inside, like they use a very, very stiff brush on the inside. Yeah. So they maintain their point, and so you can do big washes, watercolor washes with them, but you can also do really nice detail.
Yeah.
And so I have fallen in love with the watercolor brushes that Professor Gao gave me, and have been using those, and I bought some others. And so I've been doing a lot of watercolor paintings up here in the Adirondacks with those brushes. And so I've probably done, I don't know, 5 or 6 paintings since I've gotten back in watercolor. I'm still painting in oil, of course.
Yep.
And I have a lot of references and studies that I want to turn into bigger paintings.
I'll bet. Well, tell us this. And you were over there for how long? 4 weeks?
Almost a month.
Okay.
So it was 3 weeks and 5 days or something.
Okay.
It was a long time.
So you've experienced a lot. You've seen a lot. You've talked to a lot of people over there. You've seen how they approach art in general, how they approach plein air, the support that the Chinese government obviously gives their artists and their culture and so forth. What can you take back from that experience that you think would be beneficial now as you're back in the States and you're with the plein air movement here, and you have all of the events and experiences here that you sponsor through Plein Air Magazine and so forth? Have you learned anything? Are you bringing anything back with you that you can apply here?
Yeah, I think I can. First off, I've come up with a couple of new ideas for some workshop concepts that have not been done here. I'm not going to go into detail with those,
Sure.
But I think that I experienced something over there that I think would be good. There were a couple of things too that I thought was kind of fun. For instance, we were at this one event, and all of the artists who were part of this event, they laid out this giant scroll on a 40 or 50-foot table, and we all had to paint a painting on that giant scroll, and we were not given much time to do it. Another instance where we all worked on one painting together. That actually happened at least 2 or 3 different events. It was a big painting, so several of us were working on that painting at one time, and then they would hand the brushes to others, and we would all take over, and so we would do that together. And there's been a little of that at some plein air events, and I thought that was kind of fun, and people loved watching it. And it was fun for the artists too, because you can't completely predict how it's going to come out, because everybody's going to approach things differently. I would say that I think the one thing that struck me, probably the biggest thing for me was the embrace of art culture by the people and the embrace of art culture by the government.
Okay.
And I think the government is very deliberate about this. And I met with government officials in two different cities. They were probably city officials, but they were government. And they were very curious about some of the things that we're doing in America that they would like to replicate over there. And actually, I met with and set up some partnerships with some people so that I can bring some things over there that we have here. I can't say more about that at this point. And then, maybe some of my videos and products and things like that. So, and they're very, very rabid to learn from other artists in other countries
Right.
so that they can up their quality. But that seems to be the MO for all of China. And that is, we want to learn everything we can from everybody else. And then we want to push our innovation.
Right.
And I think that, I can't blame them for that. And I think it's very smart. And it worries me a little bit because it feels like in some ways they're eclipsing some of the things that are happening here. I had the opportunity to go to some factories and to see some things, some innovation at those places. But, it made me think, what I need to do is come back here and see if I can become the person who heads up the arts for America. And I don't want to do that. I have no desire to do that. I don't want anything to do with politics. I hate politics and I hate politicians. But, and by the way, all of them, all sides. But I also think that, the National Endowment for the Arts has become an organization that is rooted in what you described earlier, Paul. And that is, and I'm not being derogatory towards that, but it's not being inclusive.
Right.
And I would like to see a National Endowment for the Arts that's inclusive, that is celebrating all forms of art, celebrating modernism, celebrating exhibition art, celebrating traditional, celebrating classic, celebrating impressionism. And I think that what we're missing the boat on is that you'll see massive shows put together by museum directors. And I love these people. I'm not being critical, but you'll see shows put together by museum directors where the common man goes, I don't understand why they would put a pile of this in the middle of the floor and call that art.
Right.
And so, and there are people who do appreciate it and who do understand it. But what about making sure that we're appealing to all sides of the equation? Even though there's this attitude of it's been done, why should we repeat that? The reality is that what's happening in the modern art world is exactly, they're doing to us what was done originally that they were against. So back in the Impressionist era, you had people who were the traditionalist painters were saying this Impressionism thing isn't good. And
Right.
they fought a lot of resistance there, and they overcame that resistance, and they eventually got their notoriety. But it took a lot of effort. And so what's happening now is there's so much of the modern art world who's saying traditional art isn't good. It's been done. We don't need it anymore. And yet, what resonates with people, at least a lot of people, is traditional art. And,
Right.
and you look at what happens when the Met holds, they just closed down the Sargent show at the Met, which I went to on the first day. I got an early entry to it. And the lines, the place was packed, the tickets are all sold out, but that doesn't happen for every show.
Sure.
It happens when there's good art put forward. So what I would like to see America do, and I don't know that there's any hope of this, but I would like to see an arts community where maybe the National Endowment for the Arts is split into two divisions, one that is more traditional and one that is more modern, and that they're supporting and doing things like that. The Chinese government learned, and I learned this from talking to the owner of one of the plein air bases, Chinese government learned that plein air is good for tourism.
Yeah.
And we all know that now because there are 500. When we started Plein Air Magazine, there were no plein air events. There were 2 or 3 in the world. And today they're in the United States, there are 500. You know, you've got Plein Air Easton and Door County and all these other places. And they are hugely successful. And they're really good because people like to get out, support it, be a part of it, and it's good for tourism. They realized that when they put a plein air base in a community, it drove traffic to that community, which is mostly the students, but also the students and their families and so on. And it was boosting tourism, which resulted in those towns getting more money, which resulted in those towns getting their communities repaired, you know, the things that needed to be fixed. And so their intention is to build more of these plein air bases all around China. So there's 30 of them now, but there'll probably be a whole lot more in the future. And I don't know that we're going to be setting up plein air bases in America, but I do think this idea of getting the culture of art back into our schools, back into our communities. You know, we have a whole generation of people who are probably in their 30s or 40s who never got any art training,
Right.
because it was taken out of our schools because everything's about money, and everything can't be about money. Everything has to be about other things as well, like culture.
Right.
And we have robbed America of its culture by taking art out of the schools because we want to save a little money in the schools. And then all the focus is on other academics. But the proof is, and the evidence, there's lots of that basically says students are actually better students when they're getting away from their studies and they're doing art.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry about the soapbox.
No, no, you're preaching to the choir. Okay. So, but that's perfectly fine. So let me ask you this, Eric. You've been to China. What other places are you thinking about going to take the good word about plein air painting and so forth? You know, it strikes me, and we've talked about, and you've talked about plein air being a movement. It certainly feels like a movement in the United States. Obviously, you discovered something very similar to that, maybe on a bigger scale, for that matter, in China. What about other places? Have you got anything else on your travel schedule?
Well, yeah, I'll talk about that for a second. I would say that in terms of volume of people doing plein air, China probably is winning that battle. But those are mostly students and some of the people who continue it after their student time. In America, I think we're seeing a variety. You know, there's a lot of retired people because they have the time, they have the money to travel. We're seeing a lot more people kind of pre-retirement coming into it. And thankfully, there's a lot of really brilliant young painters. We're seeing better painters in America today than we've ever seen in the history of the world. Better painters in plein air, better painters in landscape, better painters in realism. So the quality standards are raising, and I'm pleased that we've had a little bit to do with some of that. As far as travel, you know, I love to travel. You probably know this, but I take people on trips. I'm taking a substantially large group of people to Switzerland, to the small village in Switzerland to paint this fall. I do these retreats and try to move them around to different areas, at least 2 of them, and I get groups of about 100 people to paint. I've taken people to New Zealand twice, to Africa, to Cuba twice, you know, to a lot of different places. So I'm going to continue to do that. But I was sitting in a meeting with government officials in China, and by the way, seemed very, very interested in doing things right. And it crossed my mind that I need to be doing this in every country in the world. You know, that Spain is a very big plein air area, much bigger than the rest of Europe. I got a little bit going on in Ireland and a little bit going on in England, and a little bit going on in France, but not a lot. And yet a lot of the movement really kind of began in France. So I would like to see if I can spread my wings and spread this movement throughout the world a little bit more. The Plein Air podcast has had, like 92 countries listen and millions of people listen. So hopefully we can do that. But I would like to figure out how I can take some of what we do here in the States and create versions of it in other places. And I'd be happy to be involved with it or to consult people on it. But, I want to see the world, and I think most of us do. I'm going to take a group to China. I don't know when, but I am already working on it because I want them to have the same experience, including the experience of getting to visit some of the art schools, getting to know some of the other artists, and painting and some of the most spectacular scenery. One of the things I realized is that China has such a variety. You can find Alps that eclipse the Swiss Alps, which I painted. You can find beautiful old ancient villages. I painted in 2 old ancient villages, and it was a wonderful experience. So I think that it's going to be something I'll return maybe a couple times, and I've set up some partnerships, so I'll probably be going over for some meetings.
Yeah, I was going to ask you when you were going back, because I'm sure you are. Are you going to be able to share any of the artwork that you did over there in Plein Air, or?
Well, I think in the photos I prepared for this, for the people who are watching versus listening, I think there's a couple of them. There's one with Chinese lanterns that was the one that got accepted into the museum, and there should be a picture of me with the museum director and that painting. I don't know if it's in there or not. And then there may be one other painting in there. I haven't actually photographed. Oh, there's the Chinese lantern painting. And that was the gouache painting. And I did that one twice because they took it and I didn't want them to take it. So I made a copy of it real quickly. And then I don't know, there may be another one in there. There should be a landscape painting. I was out painting on an old Chinese farm. And I actually did a demo since I had my videographer with me. I did a gouache demo at the farm, which we will somehow include in Gouache Live. So I'll at some point I left them all in Texas. I came to Texas before I came up to the Adirondacks, and so I don't have them here, but at some point I'll post them, and of course I'll take those studies and see if I can make something good out of them.
Well, let me know when you go back. I'd love to tag along.
All right. Well, I think we're going to take a group, and I think it's going to be fun. And I took my kids because I didn't take all 3 of them because one of them couldn't go, but I took them there because I thought this will be good. They need to see life in a third world country.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things the kids said is that they would have never had this experience anywhere else. We had they had banquets for us everywhere we went. The food was phenomenal. There were a couple things that I didn't know what I was eating until after I ate them. Like I ate some snake and I ate some esophagus. But they were really good until I found out what they were, and then it's like, ooh. The food was amazing. The banquets were fun. We went to this one place where we all arrived, and they put these orange sashes over our necks, and they had this big ceremony. They had music. They had singers. We must have been to 15 ceremonies in that 4 weeks. It was amazing. It was so much fun, and they made us feel very special.
So art diplomacy is not a bad way to go, right?
Well, the one thing that was interesting is I was able to talk to these artists mostly through translators, of course, and I had at one time with me 4 different translators. Most of the time I had one translator, and then but we were able to talk, and it was interesting because they had perceptions of the United States and I had perceptions of China,
Right.
and we kind of found out both of them were wrong. But
Right.
the one thing we knew, there were some opinions that I heard about some of the things we're doing wrong over here, and I didn't share any opinions with them. But the one thing we all realize is that we all have art in common, and we all love art. We're all passionate about painting. The techniques are all very similar, although the Chinese watercolor artists approach painting a lot differently than we do in America. So I've invited some of these Chinese artists to be on. We shot a couple of videos with some artists that were over there. They're going to be on some of our upcoming events like Watercolor Live and Plein Air Live and so on.
I can't wait to see that. That would be great. Okay. Sounds
all right.
good.
Well, thank you for letting me ramble, and it's fun for me to relive this and to think about it.
Absolutely.
But the good news is Plein Air is alive and well in other parts, not just here.
Sure sounds like it.
Well, thanks for the interview, Paul. Now, what I'd like to do is let's do the Art Marketing Minute.
Okay.
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
All right.
Well, I think it's quite simple, and we've talked about this before. You've got a book out. I think it's been in print since 2018, and you've talked about updating it because, and the technology has changed dramatically even since then. So the way of reaching an audience who would be interested in buying your work, there are so many more avenues to do that now than even back then. So, but it is, I think you do cover a lot of the very basic fundamentals, which I think anyone who is painting and would like to sell their work really needs to read that. And so it sounds like an ad for your book. I don't
Thank you for that. There's good news. There's good news and bad news. Which do you want first?
Yeah. Well, no, it's good because the one thing that you stress in the earlier chapters is sort of an intentionality about what it is that you're doing, and cultivating the discipline to do it. So, for example, write down what you want, what your objectives are with your artwork. What would you like to try to accomplish? What are you going to set as a goal for accomplishing that? I think are incredibly worthwhile because so few of us do that.
Well, you mentioned the book. The book is out of print, but a new book is being released, and
Okay.
I will be. I wrote 500 new pages, and I rewrote every page of that book and updated it and modernized it.
Excellent.
And the one thing, though, that you mentioned, and I think this is really important distinction, Paul, is that, and you know this because you're in advertising, and that is that the typical artist wants to start with tactics without having a strategy.
Exactly.
Right. So what that means then is that on Fridays. No, on Fridays I do feedback on my art school live show. On Mondays I do marketing Mondays, and almost every week there's a question like, which should I pick, Facebook or TikTok? And it's like maybe none of those matter.
Right.
And because you're putting the cart before the horse, right? So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And the thing about social media too, which unless you're buying clicks on social media, is that if you try to grow it organically, the deck is stacked against you. With Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and so forth, you're not reaching that many people if you go the organic route, which most of us do. They are designed, all the platforms now are truly designed to generate advertising revenue. So if you're not putting money into those social media platforms, then don't expect a tremendous amount of results realistically. Now there are
quite frankly, I mean, I spend a fortune on social media advertising.
I know you do.
And it's really hard to get that money back today.
Right.
Because attention spans have changed. The other thing is I spend a lot of money on search, SEO and search, and search is now dead. Google's biggest problem is AI because, now instead of Googling something, we go to our AI and we ask him to, I wanted to find a certain type of masseuse that I read about on social media. And so
Right.
I went into AI and I said, explain this type of massage to me, and then tell me 5 providers within 20 minutes of me.
Right.
And so I didn't go to Google for that. I went to Grok for that.
Well, when you were before you went to China, remember when we were at the Fall Color Week? No, it wasn't Fall Color Week. It was we were in the Adirondacks at the Invitational, and we were trying to figure out how to secure a videographer for you on your trip because of whatever happened. I just went on AI and I asked ChatGPT the question, and within 10 seconds I had several options for you. So I mean, it's amazing. AI is changing everything as we speak, and it will change even more each day as we go along. So yeah, with regard to SEO, yeah, it will change a lot of those metrics for sure.
Well, I
But
think that, one thing that people believe is that, and this as well as anybody because you've preached this to your clients, everybody gets seduced by big numbers,
right,
I want to go viral and I want to have 10 million views. Well, we all want that, but the reality is if you want to sell 30 paintings in a year, you only need one person. You just got to find one person to buy 30 paintings, or you got to buy two people to buy 15, or 15 people to buy 30 paintings.
right,
And so it's not really about the numbers, it's about the match, right? Are you finding the audience that you really need to match with, right? So if that's where strategy comes in so importantly, because if you understand who you're talking to, then that's going to define where you're going to talk to them.
right. Well, we have a saying in the business: you go fishing where the fish are.
Yeah.
And a lot of times clients are a little unsure about where their fish are. And so one of the things that we do is we help them figure that out. And we do that a lot through research. And we do that a lot through just being in the business, and just doing it. But yeah, it's all part of strategy, and it's all part of being very intentional about what your plans are and so forth, and not expecting overnight success.
No,
But
it takes,
it's a combination of all those things. But yeah.
So Paul, what is your best advice to an artist who says, it's time for me to start thinking about selling my work? What are the first 2 or 3 things you think they should do?
Well, the first thing is be realistic about your time allocation that you're going to devote to marketing versus painting. And, if you're just getting started, if you're just kind of getting some momentum going, expect to spend a lot more time on the marketing side than you will be on the creative side. In other words, for every 10 hours that you're going to spend painting, and this is just a rough example, I would suggest that you may need to spend 2 hours in the marketing side of that in order to make sure that you're doing it well, that you're thinking it through, and that you are and the other key thing is to be consistent. You see a lot of times clients will think, well, why didn't this ad work? Why doesn't this message work? Well, how many times did you run it? What's the frequency? How many times did you repeat that? How many times are you showing up here or there? Well, if you're only doing one-offs on your messaging, don't expect miracles. They're probably not going to happen. So I would say one of the things that you need to do is to plan on being working with some degree of frequency and consistency. And the other thing too, and I'm learning this because this is an area that I really struggle with, because people tend to want to see a consistency in the style of painting. At least it's been my experience and my observation that you're doing. And if you're, kind of going off on this tangent or whatever, and bouncing all around and never settling on a particular look or approach or style, then that's not going to give your potential buyer any confidence that what they're buying and collecting is going to be consistent with what you're going to be doing next week or next month. And me, I love to explore. I love to learn different techniques, and I like to try different things. That doesn't help me a lot in the consistency department. But imagine buying any product, and if this product bears little resemblance to the next product from the same manufacturer or from the same person, it's going to be very confusing. That essentially is your brand. And the one thing that brands have in common is that they are a consistent brand. They're a consistent product, image, promise. And so I would say it's a combination of all those things. And those are things that you need to work on. As far as where to advertise or where to market yourselves or whatever, that comes from exploring, that comes from asking, that comes from observation, going to galleries, talking to folks, and getting a sense for, who your target is, who your market is, and what artwork do they like, what style do they like, and what seems to be working in your market where you're going to be selling. So it's not easy. But I don't let that discourage you at all.
Well, nothing is easy. This idea of frequency, a magazine comes in the mail, and magazines, by the way, still work pretty well, actually. But magazine comes in the mail, somebody flips through it, and they might see your ad, they might not. And then maybe they look at it another time, and they might see your ad, they might not. And then they comes in the mail again, and they go, oh, that's interesting. I wonder who that is. And they pay attention to it for a second, and then they keep going. Then the next time it comes in, it's like, oh, I like that artist. I think I'll have to, maybe someday I'd like to be interested in that artist. And then, next time it comes in, it's like, oh yeah, I was thinking about that artist. I think I need to buy something. And then next time it comes in, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that. I want to buy this artist. Let's pick up the phone. And then they forget. And then the next time the ad comes in, they go, oh yeah, I was going to call that artist. I mean, that's how people think. Yeah. And that's why, I'll watch television and I'll see a Nissan ad that I've seen 150,000 times before. And one day, all of a sudden it clicks and I go, oh, I didn't realize that about that car. And I've seen it 1,000 times, but I wasn't paying attention. And then all of a sudden it clicks. That's why people do frequency.
Right. Well, the frequency and again, the consistency of message and so forth is so important. Basically, what you're doing is you're training your audience. And they may not be in the market for what you have to offer today, but they may be, a month from now. So you got to catch them when they're ready.
So when I teach marketing, I show an elevator, an escalator going up and down. And I say, the up is there's always new people coming into the market. And the down is there's always people leaving the market. Right. And a typical gallery or artist will lose 10% in an average year because they're dying, they're sick, they're not buying paintings, they've downsized, all these different things. But there's always new people who could be coming in. But you have to be putting yourself out there and shopping for those, because if you lose 10% a year and you haven't advertised in 10 years, you've lost all of your audience.
Right.
And I had an artist come to me one time. He said, Eric, I don't understand. He said, I used to make a lot of money. I used to sell a lot of paintings. I was famous. I don't sell anything anymore. And I said, well, what did you used to do? And he said, well, I used to do all these ads. I used to do these shows. And I said, well, when was the last time you did those things? He said, 10 years. I said, yeah, you're invisible. Nobody knows who you are anymore.
Exactly. the world changes very quickly.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Paul, thank you so much for being on and being a part of the Art Marketing Minute, but also being a part of the Plein Air podcast. It's been fun.
I enjoy it. Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
Okay, well, thanks for listening to the Marketing Minute, and thanks for listening to the podcast. By the way, I am on YouTube every day and multiple platforms with Art School Live. I hesitated because I couldn't think of it. Art School Live every weekday at 12 noon. And on Mondays, I do marketing. So I go in depth in marketing for about an hour every Monday. So go to Art School Live on YouTube and subscribe. That would be really terrific. If you have questions for art marketing, send them to me, eric@artmarketing.com. That, by the way, is a good website, artmarketing.com. We have Art Business Mastery Day coming up. I don't think I talked about that, but that's to help you sell more art. That's on November 15th. Go to artbizmastery.com, B-I-Z, artbizmastery.com. I also have a blog where I talk about life. I kind of wrote it for my kids, keep writing it for my kids. You would think they would read it. No, but maybe one day they will. Anyway, it's kind of like life advice and just what I'm thinking about at the time. And I have I don't know, a lot of readers. I'm just honored, really. It's called Sunday Coffee. You can find it at coffeewitheric.com. And remember to join me weekdays at 12 noon on Art School Live. I'm Eric Rhoads. I'm the publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine, which I'm very proud of. And thanks to Kelly Kane, who is the world's most amazing editor. She makes it great. And thank you for your time today for tuning in. Remember, it is a big world out there, really big. We learned about China, right? It's big, right? And there are a lot of plein air painters, and we want to make more people paint. We want you to bring the world together. Go out and paint, go travel the world and paint, and we will see you soon. Thanks for watching.
This has been the Plein Air Podcast with Plein Air Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.